10 minutes is going to be a cruise in a speedboat rather than a luxury liner. So in case things get a bit bumpy or you miss some of the sights, what I'd like to do is also to point out, as Christopher did this morning, that in the Pacific Economic Monitor, this recent issue, there's a slightly less sketchy treatment of the issues that might give you a bit more background on what's been happening in the Caribbean, and also give you a sense that some of the things I'm going to say do have a little bit of backing in fact, rather than just simply opinion. What I'm going to try to do is to introduce you to the main Caribbean integration project, which is that's been undertaken by the members of what is called the Caribbean Community, CARICOM. And all good discussions of regional integration start with a map. But this is one, not of the Pacific. CARICOM has 15 members. 12 of them are island economies, and 3 of them, Belize, Guyana and Suriname, are coastal states. All but 14 of them are independent states, but one of them, Montserrat, is still a dependency of the United Kingdom. There's very significant variation between the members of CARICOM, a bit like as in the Pacific. So if you think in terms of population, it varies between nearly 10 million people in Haiti to just 5,000 people in Montserrat. In terms of land area, similar divergence. The largest is Guyana, that's got nearly 215,000 square kilometres. Montserrat, once again, it's just over 100 square kilometres. And then finally, there are really big differences in levels of economic development. If you think that per capita GDP measures economic development, then you've got to recognise that the Bahamas, with a per capita GDP of over 31,000, is rather more developed than Haiti, with $1,300. And of course, Haiti, we know, is one of the poorest countries in the world. Each of the Caribbean economies, like the Pacific, is very open to international trade. And like the Pacific, they tend to be split between 2 sorts of traders. There are 3 countries, Trinidad and Tobago, Suriname and Guyana, that are resource-rich, and most of their exports are of primary products and mineral and resource-related products. The rest are primarily dependent on services, tourism, like in the Pacific, but also in a number of cases they've got significant financial service export activities. Like the Pacific, they don't trade much with each other. The only significant amount of trade that does occur between them is when Trinidad and Tobago sells petroleum products to its neighbours. And their main trading partners are North America, Canada, the United States and the European Union. Okay, that's a very brief introduction to CARICOM. What I want to do now is to give you a bit of an introduction to some of the elements of the regional integration project that CARICOM members have undertaken. And it's important to notice at the outset that regional integration has long been an essential part of the way in which the people of the Caribbean have seen their future development. And a number of the initiatives long predate independence. In fact, they go back hundreds of years, but possibly the most interesting of the more recent pre-independence initiatives was the attempt by the British to create a federation in the West Indies, basically a political union of 10 of the island colonies. It lasted a very short space of time and fell apart, as far as I can tell, because of the divergent national interests and also the divergent interests of the politicians who led the colonies, a problem that we deal with in the Pacific as well. But after the Federation fell apart, the interest in integration did not die, and so it was replaced by a series of increasingly ambitious attempts to garner the benefits of regional integration. And what we see in the Caribbean story is a set of parallel and intersecting paths of economic integration and institutional pooling and cooperation. And so in terms of the economic integration initiatives, what we've seen there is successive deepening. And in fact, I think what's happened is that even before a particular phase in the integration project has been realised, the goalposts have been shifted to set an even harder and more complex integration target for the region. So the initial steps are a free trade association, a very typical kind of free trade agreement that was set up to create a larger protected market for Caribbean manufacturers. That then morphed into a common market, a limited common market, I should say, with a customs union that was created alongside the creation of the Caribbean community itself, which incorporates not only regional integration but also captures a lot of the instruments of pooling and institutional cooperation. And then finally, the next step was to actually set economic union as the target. And that was initiated with the agreement on the Caribbean single market and economy that people came to sign up to in the early 2000s. Functional cooperation and pooling initiatives have long been a part of Caribbean integration. I've given you a large list of acronyms here, but those initiatives have been quite successful, and they've ranged across agricultural research, health, education, standards, policing, customs, and of course sport, with things like the West Indies Cricket Board, probably one of the most important regional institutions they have. There's also been a process of expansion where new members have joined, particularly Haiti and Suriname, interestingly not English-speaking countries, and there's significant talk of the Dominican Republic joining the Caribbean. Another feature of the Caribbean integration, which is long-standing, is that there's been sub-regional integration that's occurred in parallel. So in particular, the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, that's part of the Organisation of Eastern Caribbean States, has been very, very successful since 1981 in running a monetary union. Those members themselves have decided to form an economic union, and I think 5 of the members of CARICOM that are members of OECS have signed up to the treaty to form that economic union. Okay, I'll skip this slide since I'm running out of time. It just simply tries to replicate what I've already told you, that the economic integration initiatives have become increasingly complex and ambitious. How successful have the economic integration and regional integration efforts been? And here I'm going to draw upon 3 assessments, 2 external assessments and 1 internal assessment. And if I were to summarise what they say, the first assessment, the World Bank says you're not trying hard enough. Pretty typical of the World Bank. The second assessment, which was a group of management consultants, said, oh, you're probably trying to do too much. And the third assessment, which came internally from academics and economists within the Caribbean, was to say, you're probably trying to do the wrong thing. So you can understand, the guys running CARICOM are having to deal with some pretty intense criticisms about what they're doing. Just very quickly, what the World Bank said was that the economic integration agenda had stalled, and this was back in 2009, and they listed a whole number of symptoms that they identified as being problems. And a number of the symptoms they identified were not failure to complete even elements of the previous integration initiatives. So the economic union, the CSME, was stumbling because some of the earlier steps hadn't been put in place. But more importantly, some of the critical elements of an economic union, like establishing freedom of movement of goods, factors of production, services and capital, no one had made any real progress in removing the barriers within member countries. And they also then said that the institutional arrangements were not up to the task of giving effect to economic union. The next assessment was actually one commissioned by the CARICOM itself, and it was initially intended to provide recommendations on how to improve the operations of the CARICOM Secretariat. And I think there are some parallels here with what the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat has had to deal with in terms of reviews of its performance. That group of learned people that included jurists from within the Caribbean very quickly concluded that the problem wasn't the Secretariat, it was that in fact the whole CARICOM construct was facing an existential crisis. They said basically the crisis comes because the agenda is excessively ambitious given geographic and economic realities, and the mandates have expanded without any attention being given to implementation and political realities. And there's been a lack of institutional coherence and prioritisation. So the internal assessment, as I said basically the implementation deficit is hardly surprising because there's no benefits in what you're trying to do. And the complexity of what you're trying to do with the economic union leads to the project foundering because of one of the very problems that integration and regionalism were meant to address, which was the problems of state capacity. They also said that the focus on European-style integration, and it's reasonable to say that the CSME was very strongly influenced by thinking about the European integration project. And the Europeans had big inputs into thinking about how the Caribbean would move forward, but also at the time when they adopted it, this was the flavour of the month. The internal critics say the focus on European-style integration has diverted attention away from the strengths of regionalism for small island states, which are basically about functional cooperation and pooling of institutions to deliver regional public goods. They also said that the parallel hemispheric integration that had been going on, and in particular the conclusion of the Economic Partnership Agreement with the European Union, which CARICOM succeeded to achieve along with the Dominican Republic, they said that's actually supplanting rather than reinforcing effective regionalism. I get 2 more seconds. I'll just quickly run through what I think are lessons of the Pacific again. Look, CARICOM's got some advantages relative to Pacific Island countries. On average, higher levels of economic development. They're much closer to big markets, there's less fragmentation, and there's historically much stronger pan-regional sentiment. It's also useful to recognise, if you cast your mind back to that to that map I showed at the beginning, you can fit the whole of the Caribbean into the territorial waters of Kiribati. So you've got far fewer problems of fragmentation between countries and within countries than you do in the Pacific. But like the Pacific, CARICOM members find themselves between the rock of geography and the hard place of politics in pursuing regional integration. The geographic rock means that regional trade and factor market integration do not act as major drivers of growth. The political hard place means it's hard to get agreement to cede sovereignty to regional institutions to achieve economies of scale and to share costs of statehood. And the geographic rock means that trade and factor market integration is not a good entry point to addressing the barriers to regional cooperation and institutional pooling. That was the essence of the European model. Get business really strongly behind the integration project by liberalising markets first and then move to the institutional setting processes. That will not work in small island states because you don't get the bang for the buck from regional economic integration. It's also not clear that trade and investment agreements with external partners help the regional project, but it's also clear that smaller groupings of similar countries with cultural and historical links may make progress where larger groupings cannot. But I think the biggest lesson from CARICOM experience for the Pacific is it's really important that you match the integration agenda to the political and institutional realities. What is actually feasible? Thank you.